The waiting room smells of new paint and old money, that specific Kumasi combination of ambition layered over red earth. Constance Boateng sits with her legs crossed, her handbag on her lap, her spine perfectly vertical in a plastic chair that was clearly not designed for a woman who has spent 14 years performing composure. She checks her phone. No signal. She checks her watch. 11 minutes past the hour. Outside the single window, a row of neem trees stands against a sky the color of hammered copper. Somewhere beyond them, she knows, is the land. 200 acres of it. The last thing standing between her and ruin. The door opens. She rises. She straightens her jacket. She is already building the opening sentence in her mind, measured, confident, professionally warm, when the man in the doorway stops her cold. He is wearing dusty boots, a simple kente-bordered shirt. He is carrying nothing, no briefcase, no folder, no phone. He stands in the frame of the door and looks at her, and the expression on his face is not surprise. It has never been surprise. She knows that face. She has known it for 22 years. The last time she saw it, she was telling it, in front of 43 members of her family, that she was choosing a different future. His name is Kofi Asante, and he owns every centimeter of the land she has traveled 200 kilometers to beg for. Constance, he says. His voice has not changed. Please sit down. This is the story of Kofi Asante. To understand what happened in that room in Kumasi, you must first understand what kind of man Kofi Asante had always been, not what people assumed he was. Those were two very different things, and the distance between them had cost everyone in this story something they would not fully calculate until it was too late. He was born on the 23rd of April, in the small hours of a morning his mother would later describe as the quietest she had ever known. No rain, no wind, not even the generator that usually labored through the night. Just silence, and then Kofi. He grew up on 12 acres of land outside Kumasi that his father, Emmanuel Asante, had refused to sell regardless of how many times the city crept toward his fence line. Emmanuel Asante was a man who believed in three things: the land, the work, and the long view. He distrusted elegance. He distrusted shortcuts. He told his son many times, in the particular Twi that carries the weight of a father's whole philosophy in a single phrase, Obi amma wo adwuma anya wo ankasa. If no one gives you work, make your own. Kofi had done exactly that. What the outside world did not know, what Constance Boateng, sitting in that plastic chair, had never known, was that the 12 acres Emmanuel Asante left his son in 2008 were not the end of something. They were the beginning. He had learned early that silence was a form of strategy. Not cowardice, strategy. When people looked at a man in dusty boots and decided what he was worth in under 4 seconds, he had two choices: correct them or let them continue believing. He had always chosen the second, not from pride exactly, from something more patient than pride. He had inherited his father's long view, and the long view required that you not spend your energy on what people thought today. What mattered was what the land would say tomorrow, and the land in Kofi's experience always spoke. You simply had to be willing to wait for it. He was 31 years old when Constance ended their engagement. They had been together for 4 years, the kind of relationship that begins in university corridors and survives on shared ambition and the particular intimacy of two people who are equally hungry for the future they haven't built yet. He had loved her with the careful, thorough love of a man who does not love lightly. He had told her once that he was going to build something on his father's land that would outlast both of them. She had smiled. He had not known then that she was already picturing a different kind of future, one with glass towers in it, and a man whose net worth was not theoretical. The engagement ended on a Sunday. Emmanuel Asante had been dead for 3 weeks. Kofi was still in the strange fog that follows a father's death. That particular grief that is also an inheritance, that is also a responsibility, that is also a question you are not yet ready to answer. The family gathering had been Constance's mother's idea. What followed had not been subtle. "He is a good man," Constance's mother had said, in the particular tone that means the next word will cancel everything before it. But a good man who will spend his life in the soil. That is not the life for my daughter." Constance had said nothing to contradict her. That silence, that specific chosen silence, was the thing Kofi had carried for 14 years. He had left the gathering before dessert was served. He had gone home to 12 acres of red earth and a father's unfinished dream, and he had made a decision that had no drama in it whatsoever. He was going to build the thing he had promised, and he was going to do it without explaining himself to anyone. His sister Abina had been 17 when all of this happened. She was now 31, and she ran the Accra operations of Asante Agricultural Holdings with a precision that made their accountant describe her once as the most dangerous woman in a spreadsheet I have ever encountered. She was the public face of a company whose owner preferred to remain invisible. She negotiated contracts. She attended galas. She shook hands with ministers. And she had spent the last 14 years watching her brother build an empire from the outside in, buying adjacent land quietly across 3 regions, one small parcel at a time, until the 12 acres became 1,400. She was the one who had told Kofi about Constance Boateng's situation. "Her company is underwater," Abina had said 3 months ago, sitting across from him at the kitchen table that had been in their family since 1987. Reginald Ease left, took the Accra portfolio with him. She's left with the name and the debt. Kofi had said nothing for a long time. "The land she needs," Abina continued, "is your southernmost block, the 200 acres along the Ofinso Road corridor." He had looked at his tea. "Send her the standard process." Abina had looked at him the way she had always looked at him, when she suspected he was lying to himself. She said nothing more. She sent Constance Boateng's legal team the standard process, and she waited. Constance Boateng's office in Accra sat on the 14th floor of a building that smelled of imported carpet cleaner and the particular anxiety of people performing confidence they no longer fully feel. She had built Boateng Development Group over 11 years, first as a junior partner under Reginald Ease's name, then as a co-director, then, when the marriage had seemed stable enough to count on, as an equal owner. The error in that calculation had revealed itself on a Thursday morning, in the form of a letter from a Lagos law firm that Reginald had retained 6 weeks before he announced he was leaving. The letter was very precise. In the division of assets that followed, 18 months of legal proceedings that cost her more than she will calculate even now, she had kept the company name, 3 mid-tier residential projects in Tema and Takoradi, and a debt portfolio that her finance director described the week after the final settlement as manageable if the Kumasi corridor deal goes through. There was only one problem with the Kumasi corridor deal. The land required for the anchor parcel, 200 acres along the Ofinso Road, positioned perfectly for the government's planned logistics hub, was owned by a private holding company called Asante Agricultural Holdings, and Asante Agricultural Holdings did not appear to have a public face. "Who runs it?" she had asked her legal team. "We can't find a named director," said her junior associate, a young man named Kweku, who wore his suit slightly too large and his anxiety slightly too visibly. "It's registered in Kumasi. The incorporation papers have a nominee structure. Whoever this is, they don't want to be found." Constance had looked out the window at 14 floors of Accra traffic, the particular orchestra of horns and generators, and the distant percussion of construction that means a city that never stops. And she had said simply, "Find them." Kweku found them, or rather he found the edges of them, a holding company inside a holding company, structured with the quiet thoroughness of someone who had thought very carefully about privacy. But at the center of the structure, registered as the originating entity, was a name that was not a company name, a family name, Asante. "It's a common name," Kweku offered. "I know it's a common name," Constance said. "Keep looking." She did not tell him why the name had made her pause. She did not tell him about a Sunday 14 years ago, or a man in a family compound, or the words she had not said when she should have. She had become, over the years, very skilled at not telling people things that were not relevant to the transaction at hand. The next 6 weeks were the kind of slow-motion negotiation that Constance had conducted dozens of times. Offer letters, counter-offers, intermediaries, legal teams exchanging language, at the careful pace of people who are being paid by the word. The holding company responded through a law firm in Kumasi. The law firm communicated through a representative who gave her name as Abena Mensa Asante. The name landed differently the second time she saw it. She met Abena Mensa Asante in person once at a preliminary meeting in an Accra hotel conference room. The woman was small and precise in the way of people who have spent years being underestimated and have learned to use it. She wore no jewelry except a single thin bracelet on her left wrist. She sat across the table from Constance and 3 members of Constance's legal team, and she listened to the full presentation, 47 slides, 2 architectural renders, 3 financial projections, without a single note. And then she said, "The owner has reviewed similar proposals. He is not interested in the standard offer structure." "What structure does he prefer?" Constance asked. "He prefers a conversation," Abena said, "in Kumasi, in person." Constance had looked at her. There was something in the woman's stillness that was not quite professional neutrality. It was something else, something that looked from a certain angle like a person who knew how this story was going to end and had decided not to ruin it early. "Fine," Constance said. "Kumasi." That evening, alone in her office, Constance returned to the archive search she had been conducting on and off for weeks. She was looking for anything, a photograph, a speech, a local news mention, that would give the faceless owner of Asante Agricultural Holdings a face. Kweku had found nothing, but Kweku had been searching business databases. Constance searched differently. She found it in the digital archive of a Kumasi local paper. A brief article from 2019, 3 paragraphs, about a land acquisition near Mampong. The headline was functional rather than memorable. But the photograph that accompanied it, a man standing at the edge of a field, looking at something beyond the frame, stopped her entirely. She knew the angle of those shoulders. She knew the particular stillness of a man looking at land he considers his own. She could not be certain. The photograph was small and the light was afternoon flat, and 7 years is a long time for a face to age into new certainty. But the name in the caption when she found it, a single line in the article's closing paragraph, confirmed what her stomach had already told her. Kofi Asante, owner. She closed her laptop. She sat for a long time in the dark and the air conditioning, and she told herself in the firm, precise interior voice she had developed for exactly this kind of moment that the past was not relevant to the transaction. This was business. She was going to Kumasi to negotiate a land sale, that was all. She repeated this to herself until it began to sound true. She did not go to Kumasi immediately. There were 3 more weeks of negotiation through intermediaries, weeks in which Mr. Solomon Haruna, Constance's business partner on the Kumasi project, grew progressively less calm about the pace of things. Haruna was a man who measured the quality of a deal by how quickly it moved. He had been useful to Constance in the years when Reginald was still in the picture, a connector, a man who knew which officials to invite to which events. But in the aftermath of the divorce, his usefulness had become entangled with his anxiety, and his anxiety had begun to express itself in ways Constance found increasingly difficult to manage. "We need to move faster," he said, on the phone from Lagos at 7:30 in the morning. The sound of a hotel room somewhere in the background, the particular acoustics of expensive isolation. "I have investors who are asking questions." "The owner requires a process," Constance said. "We are in the process." "Then accelerate the process. Offer him above market. People always respond to above market." "Haruna." "Constance." His voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted to sound like he was giving her information for her own good. "Do you know what happens to this deal if it falls through? Do you understand what your finance director told you?" She did understand. She had read the report twice. The Tema project was 6 months from completion, but cash flow constrained. The Takoradi residential units were moving more slowly than projected. The Kumasi corridor deal was not the last card she held, it was the only card. She had spent the drive back from the hotel that evening, conducting the internal audit she conducted most evenings now, the accounting of all the choices that had brought her to the particular configuration of her current situation. She was good at this audit. She had done it so many times that she could move through it quickly, cataloguing each decision with the brisk efficiency of a person who has accepted the past and is focused on the future. The marriage, the asset structure, the trust she had extended where she should have required documentation. These were known variables. She was at peace with them. What she was not at peace with, what she had never fully audited, because some ledgers are easier to leave closed, was the question of what she had given up in the years before Reginald, what she had dismissed, what she had stood in a family compound and allowed to walk away while she said nothing. She had told herself for 14 years that the choice had been correct, that a man who intended to spend his life on 12 acres in Kumasi was not the future she had worked toward. That love at 28 is no substitute for ambition. But sometimes, in the specific silence of a car moving through Accra at night, with the city's 10 million lives humming around her like a thing she had no name for, she wondered if there was a version of her life where she had made a different calculation. And she always closed that wondering quickly, the way you close a window before the rain comes in. The third week of negotiations brought something she had not anticipated. Kweku came to her office with a printed document and the expression of someone who has found information they are not entirely sure how to present. "I went back through the land registry," he said. "Not just the Ofinzo Road parcel. All of Asante Agricultural Holdings." She looked at him. "And?" "The 200 acres you need is part of a 1,400-acre consolidated block," Kweku said. "They've been acquiring land in the Ashanti and Bono regions since 2009, quietly, one parcel at a time. This company is not a small landowner, Madam Constance. This company is—" He looked at his document. "I don't know a polite word for what this company is." "Large," she said. "Very large and very patient. Whoever built this has been building it for 15 years without anyone noticing." She looked at the document he placed on her desk. The map of consolidated parcels. 12 acres at the center, the original parcel, the one she could now date, in her mind, to a father's death and a Sunday she would rather not name. And around it, like rings growing outward from a stone dropped into still water, the quiet accumulation of 14 years of work. She sat with that map for a long time after Kweku left. Outside her window, the city made its ordinary noise. She thought about a man who had been told, at his most vulnerable, that he was not enough, and who had responded not with anger, not with drama, but with 15 years of silent, patient building. She thought about what it costs a person to be that quiet for that long. She did not let herself think about it for more than 30 seconds. The fourth week brought something that felt, briefly, like resolution. Abena Mensa Asante, through the Kumasi law firm, through the language of formal correspondence, communicated that the owner was willing to proceed to final terms. A draft sale agreement arrived. Constance's legal team reviewed it for 48 hours and came back with 3 pages of proposed amendments, all of which were minor. Constance signed the cover letter herself. Haruna called from Lagos. "Tell me we're close." "We're close," she said. There was a pause in which she could hear him breathing out. "Good. Good, how close?" "Draft agreement is with their lawyers. Final terms by end of the week." He said something warm then, something that sounded, for the first time in months, like actual relief. She felt it too, cautiously, the way you feel warmth from a fire you know is not fully yours to trust. 2 days later, a message arrived from the Kumasi law firm. It was 4 sentences long. "The owner has reviewed the proposed amendments. He finds the documentation insufficient for a transaction of this complexity. He requires a direct meeting with the principal of Boateng Development Group, not legal representatives. The meeting will take place at his offices in Kumasi at a time of mutual convenience." Haruna did not take this well. "He's playing games," he said. "This is a power move. He's going to use the meeting to extract a higher price." "Possibly," Constance said. "Don't let him. You go in there with a firm number and you don't move from it. I know how to negotiate, Solomon. I know you do." A pause. "I'm saying, go in strong. Don't let him think you need this." She said nothing to that. After she hung up, she sat with the instruction, "Don't let him think you need this," and turned it over in the particular way she had of examining advice that is technically correct and fundamentally useless. She needed this. She needed this in the way that a person needs the last rope at the bottom of a very deep hole. The question was not whether to go. The question was what she was going to do when she walked through that door and found out with certainty whether the man behind Asante Agricultural Holdings was the man she had already half accepted it would be. In Kumasi, on the farm that had started all of this, Kofi Asante was doing what he did most mornings, walking the land, not inspecting it exactly, walking it, the way you walk through a room where someone you loved once lived, feeling the specific quality of the light, the way your feet know the uneven places in the floor without being told. He had been walking this land since he was 4 years old. He knew it the way he knew his own breathing. Ambina had come to the farm the previous weekend. She had sat across from him at the same table where they had discussed Constance 3 months ago, and she had said without preamble, "You've been reading the correspondence before it goes to the lawyers." He had not denied it. "You knew within 3 days who it was," she said. "You've been watching her negotiate through intermediaries for 6 weeks. You know exactly how desperate she is." She paused. "Kofi." "It's business," he said. She looked at him with the particular quality of a younger sister who has known someone long enough to hear what they are not saying. "Is it?" He said nothing. "Because, from where I'm sitting," Abina said, "it looks like you are watching her suffer and calling it strategy. And I don't think that is who Daddy raised." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it, not empty, but full of things neither of them was willing to say aloud. Kofi looked at his hands. Red earth under the nails. 14 years of red earth under the nails. "She needs the land," he said finally. "I know she does. She's going to get it. I was always going to sell it." "Then why the meeting?" Abena asked. "Why not just let the lawyers finish?" He did not answer. She did not push. She left the next morning without resolving the question, which was he knew her way of leaving it where it belonged, inside him where he would have to answer it himself. He had not, by the morning of Constance's arrival, answered it. What Kofi had not told Abena, what he had barely told himself in the private accounting of the sleepless hours between 3 and 5 in the morning when the farm was completely silent and there was nowhere to look except inward, was what he had done in the 3rd week of negotiations. Haruna had gone behind Constance's back. Not dramatically, not in a way that would be immediately visible, but Kofi's lawyers had discovered in a routine due diligence review of the buyer's financials that Haruna had been in separate communication with a rival holding company, exploring the possibility of cutting Constance out of the deal entirely and proceeding with a different buyer entity. The communication was exploratory. It had not advanced. But it was there, a quiet preparation for betrayal, the kind a man makes when he is not confident the woman in front of him will succeed. Kofi had read the report. He had sat with it for 12 hours, and then he had done something that he had not shared with anyone. He had sent a single anonymous message to Constance's personal email, routed through enough intermediaries to be untraceable, containing a screenshot of the relevant communication. 3 lines, no explanation, no signature. He told himself he had done it because it was the right thing, because she deserved to know who she was standing next to, because what Haruna was planning was dishonest, and he did not want dishonesty to be the mechanism by which she lost the only deal that could save her. These were all true, they were also incomplete. The part he did not say aloud, even inside the privacy of his own mind, was simpler and less comfortable than any of the justifications. He did not want her to lose because of Haruna. He wanted her to lose or win on her own terms, because the only version of this story that had any integrity was the one where she looked at him across that table and made whatever she was going to make of it without Haruna's betrayal as a variable. He was not sure even now whether this made him generous or something more complicated than generous. Abena would have known immediately. He was glad Abena was not in his head. She had read the anonymous message on the train to Kumasi. She had read it twice, saved the screenshot, forwarded it to her own personal archive, and then she had called Haruna from the corridor between carriages, standing with the sound of the track under her feet and the countryside moving past the window in a blur of green. She did not accuse him. She simply said, "I know about the other communication." A pause, long enough to be its own admission. It was exploratory, he said. Nothing. I know, she said. We'll discuss it after Kumasi. She hung up. She stood for a moment with the phone in her hand and the train moving beneath her, and she thought about who had sent that message. Only someone with access to the due diligence file. Only someone on the other side of this negotiation. She had no proof, but she had spent 14 years in rooms with people making calculations, and she could feel the outline of the one being made here. She could feel its particular geometry. She walked back to her seat. She straightened her jacket. She looked out the window at the approaching Kumasi hills, and she prepared herself. He was standing when she entered. The room was small and plainly furnished. A table, 4 chairs, a single overhead light. Through the window, the neem trees. Beyond them, the land. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence had the quality of something that has been building for 14 years and is finally, without drama or warning, arriving. "Kofi," she said. "Constance." His voice was precisely what it had always been, unhurried, level, containing more than it showed. "Please sit down." She sat. He sat opposite her. There was no legal team. There were no slide presentations. There was only the table between them and 14 years of unspoken arithmetic. "You knew it was me," she said. "It was not a question." "Within 72 hours of the first inquiry," he said. She absorbed that. "You let it go on for 6 weeks." He said nothing. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the way you look at someone when you are trying to reconcile the person you remember with the person in front of you. He had changed in the ways that 14 years of work change a man. Broader across the shoulders, steadier in the stillness, with the kind of face that has been outside in all weathers and has stopped apologizing for it. But there was something in his eyes that had not changed at all. The particular quality of a person who sees clearly and says nothing about it. "You own all of it," she said. "Not just this land, all 1,400 acres." "Yes." "The company, the structure, all of it." "Yes." She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. "I thought, when I saw the photograph, I thought I might be wrong." "You were not wrong." A silence. "Then, why didn't you just close the deal through the lawyers? You were going to sell. Why the meeting?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something that she had not expected, something that reframed everything she thought she understood about why she was sitting in this room. "Because I needed to see," he said, "whether you knew what you were asking for." She frowned. "The land—" "Not the land." He placed his hands flat on the table, the hands of a man who has worked outside his whole life, the nails still carrying traces of red earth despite everything. "This project, what you intend to build. I have read every document your team submitted. I have read the architectural plans. I have read the community impact assessment." He paused. "The assessment lists 6,000 farming families whose land access will be permanently altered by the logistics hub infrastructure." She was very still. "There is one paragraph," Kofi continued. "At the bottom of page 31, it describes mitigation measures." He looked at her. "The mitigation measures are inadequate. The government approved the plan. I am not asking about the government." His voice did not rise, it never rose. "I am asking about Boateng Development Group. I am asking about you. What do you intend to do about the 6,000 families on page 31? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. She had come into this room with a prepared version of herself, contained, professional, strategically warm. That version of herself was still present, but something underneath it had shifted, in the way that things shift when you're in a room with a person who knows you before you put on the face you have worn for 14 years. "You're not going to make this easy," she said. "I have never been easy," Kofi said. "You know that." Something moved in her face. Not remorse exactly, not yet. Something preliminary, the facial expression of a person who is beginning to understand the full shape of a cost they thought they had already paid. "What happened between us," she began, "is not relevant to this transaction," he said, quietly, precisely. The same phrase she had used on herself, on the train. She heard it land differently from his mouth. "Kofi." Constance. He leaned forward slightly. I am not a man who was wounded by you and built an empire to punish you. I want you to understand that clearly. This land, this company, is not a response to you. It is a response to my father. It is what I always intended to build. You are not in it. She absorbed the specific quality of that sentence. You are not in it. It was not cruel. It was something far more difficult to manage than cruelty. It was true. Then why are you making it personal? She said. Because you made it personal when you submitted an impact assessment with inadequate mitigation for 6,000 people, he said. Because the kind of developer who does that is a specific kind of developer. And before I put my land in those hands, I need to know which kind of developer is actually sitting across this table from me. She was quiet for a long time. The specific quality of her quiet was different now from the professional composure she had walked in with. This quiet had something raw in it, something that had been under the polished surface for a long time. The mitigation plan can be improved, she said finally. Can it or will it? Will it? She said it without hesitation, and the certainty in her voice surprised even her. I'll commission a full revision. Community consultation process, proper relocation support, employment priority for local farming families in the construction phase. She paused. And beyond. He looked at her for a long moment. You could have said that immediately, he said. You knew the assessment was thin. Yes, she said, I knew. Why didn't you improve it before submitting? The honest answer was one she had been avoiding for 4 months, because Haruna had told her the government approval was sufficient, and she had let herself believe that because she needed the deal to be simple, and because the version of herself who demands the thorough thing when the simple thing is available, is a version she can only afford to be when she is not drowning. She said a version of this, not all of it. Enough. Kofi listened. He said nothing while she spoke, which was its own form of attention. The undivided, unhurried attention of someone who has nowhere else to be. When she finished, he said, The meeting is about whether I trust you, not whether I trust Boateng Development Group, whether I trust you. She met his eyes. That's a harder question. I know, he said. Answer it anyway. She thought about all the things she could say. The professional version, the strategic version, the version that was technically true and emotionally evasive. She said none of them. I don't know, she said. I have spent 14 years making decisions I could justify. Some of them I could justify more than others. The thing with Reginald, I built that marriage on a calculation, and the calculation failed. Not because the calculation was wrong, but because a marriage is not a calculation, and I spent 11 years learning that lesson. She paused. What I did to you, in that compound, was a calculation too, and I have spent considerably more than 11 years understanding what I got wrong. The room was very quiet. The neem trees outside were still. I'm not here to apologize, she continued, and her voice was steady, because she had decided somewhere on the train that if she was going to walk into this room and face what was in it, she was going to face it without the luxury of managed emotion. An apology at this point would be an insult to the time involved. I am here to tell you that the man I sent away in that compound has apparently spent 15 years proving every word of my dismissal incorrect. And I would like to conduct this transaction honestly, with full knowledge of what I am asking for and who I am asking it from. Silence. That is the most honest thing I have said in a business meeting in 6 years, she added. Something passed across Kofi's face that was not quite a smile and not quite its absence. It was the expression of a person receiving information that changes the configuration of a room without changing the fundamental facts of what needs to happen in it. The mitigation plan, he said, in writing, community consultation timeline, employment covenant embedded in the sale agreement, not as a side letter. Agreed, she said. My lawyers will draft the revised terms. Fine. He looked at her. She looked at him. Outside, the land waited, as it had been waiting for 15 years. Patient, certain, speaking in the only register that had never failed him. Constance, he said. Yes? Haruna? He let the name sit between them. I know about what he was planning. She was very still. "I know too. He is not in the room. He is not in this deal." "No," she said, "he is not." The revised sale agreement took 11 days to draft. In those 11 days, Constance Boateng did 3 things. She fired Solomon Haruna. Not loudly, not in a way that produced a press release or a LinkedIn post or any of the other theater that business separations sometimes generate. She called him on a Wednesday, and she said, very clearly, "Our partnership is concluded. You'll receive the terms from my legal team by end of day." He protested. She listened without interruption until he stopped, and then she said, "Goodbye, Solomon." And she meant it in all the ways that word can be meant. She commissioned a full revision of the community impact assessment. She hired an independent Ghanaian NGO, one with a 14-year track record in community land rights, to lead the consultation process. She told her finance director to allocate the budget before she had the sale proceeds to cover it. Her finance director looked at her with the expression of someone witnessing a reckless act. She told him it was not reckless. It was the only transaction she was going to make from now on that she could put her actual name on. And she sat down alone on a Thursday evening in the office she had built and nearly lost, and she wrote a letter that she did not send. It was addressed to Kofi Asante, and it said everything that could not be said in a boardroom, the things that exist below the layer of professional honesty, in the place where people keep what they genuinely regret. She wrote it in one sitting. She read it once. She did not send it, because she had enough integrity to know that the timing of sending it would make it look like something it wasn't, a softening tactic, a transaction of its own. She folded it and kept it. Some truths are for you alone. The day the sale agreement was signed, Kofi walked the land one final time. He did this alone. Early morning, before the staff arrived, before the lawyers were at their desks, just him and the red earth and the particular light that falls on the Kumasi Hills between 5 and 6 in the morning, that specific gold that is not quite day and not quite night, that belongs to no official category of time and is, for that reason, his favorite hour. He walked the full perimeter of the 200 acres. It took him a long time. He was not walking quickly. He stopped occasionally and crouched to pick up a handful of soil, let it fall through his fingers, let it go. His father had told him once that you do not own land. You are the land's current responsibility. You hold it carefully, and then you give it to whoever is next. He was not certain, standing there in the gold of early morning with the soil falling through his hands, what he felt. Not grief. He had not expected grief. The land that remained was larger. The work that remained was larger. He was building a school on the north parcel, an agricultural education institute, the thing his father had always said the region needed. That was the next project. That was the long view. But there was something in the selling of this particular parcel, this specific 200 acres, that was not purely financial. Something he was releasing that had been wound around the transaction from the beginning, something that had nothing to do with land title, and everything to do with 14 years of a silence he had not known was still heavy until now. He stood for a long time at the southern boundary. He was not thinking about Constance Boateng. He was thinking about his father, and about the kind of man his father had been, and about whether the man he had become was, in the end, the man his father had tried to build. He thought about the anonymous message he had sent. He thought about the weeks he had let the negotiation run without revealing himself. He thought about what Abena had said, "That is not who Daddy raised," and he thought that she was not entirely wrong, and she was not entirely right, and the truth of it was somewhere in the complicated middle where most human things live. He was not proud of all of it. He was not ashamed of all of it. He had been a human being in a painful situation, and he had behaved with the full imperfect complexity of a human being in a painful situation. He stood up. He brushed the soil from his hands. He turned and walked back toward the farm. The consequences arrived the way consequences usually do, not in a single dramatic event, but in a series of ordinary things accumulating meaning. The sale closed on a Thursday. The Community Impact Assessment revision was submitted to the government authority the following Monday, and within 6 weeks it had generated something remarkable. A coalition of local farming community leaders, who, having been consulted for the first time in the history of this particular development corridor, formally endorsed the Boateng Development Group project. This endorsement was reported in 3 regional papers and 1 national outlet. Haruna sued. His claim was weak and his lawyers knew it was weak, and the settlement, when it came 4 months later, cost Constance considerably less than his initial threat suggested. She paid it without drama. The Tema residential project completed on schedule. The Takoradi units moved faster once the company's public positioning shifted, once Boateng Development Group stopped being the company attached to a contentious divorce and started being the company whose Kumasi project had won a community endorsement, the ministry was using as a national case study. Her finance director at the end of the 3rd quarter produced a report that contained the phrase, "trajectory of recovery." He had not used the word recovery in a report in 18 months. He presented it to her with the expression of a man who has been proved wrong in the most satisfying possible way. Kofi Asante began construction on the Agricultural Education Institute in October. He named it after his father, the Emmanuel Asante Institute for Agricultural Sciences. The groundbreaking ceremony was held on what would have been Emmanuel's 78th birthday, 8 months later. The harmattan had come early to Kumasi that year, that dry northern wind that arrives like an uninvited guest and stays until the rains, turning the air amber with fine dust, making everything feel simultaneously desiccated and full of static potential. The institute was in its foundation phase, visible from the road as a geometry of concrete and promise, a thing that was not yet what it would become. Kofi was at the site at 7:30 in the morning when the car arrived. He did not recognize it at first. A rental, clean but anonymous, the kind you get from a hire company at the Kumasi airport. It parked at the edge of the site and a woman got out. She was wearing boots, sensible ones, not the heels she had arrived in 8 months ago. Her jacket was the color of unglazed clay. She stood at the edge of the crowd of workers and site engineers and did not announce herself. She simply looked at the institute taking shape in the early light, her hands in her pockets, and she was very still in the way of someone who has come to look at something and is doing exactly that. Kofi watched her from across the site. He watched her for a long time. She did not see him, or if she did, she gave no sign of it. She stood and she looked at the thing being built, and her face had in it something that could not be described simply as satisfaction or remorse or any of the other emotions that would make this moment easier to name. It was something more compound, the expression of a person who is accounting for the full cost of a long series of choices, not in shame, not in celebration, but in the plain recognition that this is what those choices have built, and this is what those choices have not built, and both are true at once. She did not stay long. After perhaps 15 minutes, she walked back to the rental car and she got in, and she drove away. Kofi turned back to the site. One of his engineers approached with a question about the foundation drainage. He answered it. He picked up his notebook. He went back to work. He thought about her once more in the evening, not in the way that people think about unfinished things, with the particular restless longing of an open loop. He thought about her the way he thought about all the significant events in the story of this land, as something that had happened, that had shaped what came after, that was now part of the permanent record of how things had become what they were. He did not wish she had stayed. He did not regret that she had come. He held both of these at the same time, the way his father had taught him to hold contradictions, not by resolving them, but by giving them enough room to exist without one cancelling the other. He had built something. She was rebuilding something. These were separate stories that had briefly, structurally intersected, the way 2 land parcels share a boundary without belonging to the same owner. He put his notebook away. He stepped out onto the farm. The harmattan had quieted. The sky above the Kumasi hills was the deepest, cleanest blue he had seen all year, that specific blue that arrives when the dust settles and the air decides briefly to be transparent. He stood there for a moment and breathed it in. Then he went back to work. Abina called that evening. She always knew, without being told, when a day had been significant. She came, she said. Not a question. She came, Kofi confirmed. A pause. How was it? He thought about this. About the woman standing at the edge of his sight in boots and a clay-colored jacket, looking at something she had not built and would not build, with an expression that could not be reduced to a single word. It was what it was, he said. Abena made the sound she made when she thought he was being a man about something. And what was it? He looked out the window at the farm in the evening light, the neem trees, the long field, the specific silence of land that is being worked and believed in. An honest thing, he said. Finally. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Daddy would say the land always settles its own accounts. Daddy said a lot of things. He wasn't wrong very often. No, Kofi said. He wasn't. He hung up. He stood for a while in the kitchen, the table, the chair, the particular smell of red earth that had been in this house since before he was born, that would be in it long after he was gone. He was 45 years old. He had built from 12 acres something that would outlast him. He had done the work his father had asked him to do. He had made mistakes. He had corrected some of them. He had not corrected all of them. This was the full accounting, and it was, by the only measure he had ever trusted, enough. Some people mistake your silence for poverty. Let them. Silence is the only language that has never been wrong about what a person is worth. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and click the bell. Our next story begins here.